Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Roads to Research. Help yourself to coffee in the corner there. Today, we're very pleased to have three presenters, Doctors Ling, Ingrid, Kajzer Mitchell, and Charles Krusekopf. And the title of their presentation is Pathways Towards Whole Community Transformation, the Role of Incentives, Social Marketing, and Education. Over to you. Oh, and a reminder that these are being filmed. Thanks.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. I'm going to kick us off, and then we've got a bit of tag teaming going on with different bits. So it'll obviously be all smooth and seamless and very fluent and professional. Some of you will have seen some of our material on the Solar Colwood project before, but I just thought there'd be a number of people who haven't, so we'll just cover a couple of sort of basic points. The Solar Colwood program was based around a grant from the Clean Energy Fund at NRCan, who awarded the city $3.9 million for solar hot water retrofitting of primarily homes but also businesses. The Solar Colwood project as a whole and had another sort of bits added to it as part of that package. For example, a solar thermal retrofit of the Colwood Fire Hall, demonstration of new development, demonstration of the use of these technologies in new development at Colwood Corners, education and research, which is why Royal Roads was brought in as a partner, and the Office of Research, Office of Sustainability have done a bunch of work on monitoring and things like that. And also, as you've probably seen around the city, electric vehicle infrastructure has been put in as a result of this program as well. So although the main focus was originally the solar hot water, it has other elements and has changed over time as to what the focus is as well. So the current stated aim of Solar Colwood is the light blue at the top, aims to have 1,000 Colwood residents and businesses take energy saving actions at home, at work and on the road. That's morphed somewhat from the original aims, which are also there, which are Solar Colwood will aim to retrofit 1,000 homes, which is about 1/6 of the housing stock, with solar hot water heating and other clean energy-saving retrofits over the next 3 years. So what we wanted to do when we started this research is really look into how the Solar Colwood project has been perceived and spread throughout the community of Colwood, and looking at some of the reasons why, or as it turns out to a certain extent why not, lots of people have installed solar hot water on their homes, and looking at some of the other impacts as a result of the project. So we've carried out a number of different exercises. We've carried out focus groups with various different people. We've done a few surveys with different groups of people. We've done some interviews, and we've also run a number of student projects with BSc students, with some master's students who acted as research assistants for us from the MEM program and from the interdisciplinary studies program. And, you know, all those conversations and anecdotal stuff that sort of comes our way, all part of the evidence that we've considered. So where is the project now? And these are figures that we had as of March the 12th. So they're sort of about a month and a half old. So 34 installations of solar hot water, 73 installations of another type of technology, which was introduced as a result of leveraging some grant money from BC Hydro for ductless split heat pumps, which is if you're familiar with heat pump technology, this is a particular one that's very useful for homes which have baseboard heating rather than furnaces. So it's a way of using heat pumps in houses which don't have ducts and things within them, hence the name. 171 homes have undertaken other energy retrofits as a result of engagement with the program. 229 homes have taken energy assessments. 331 homes have received energy and water savings kits, and 758 individuals have signed up for an email newsletter. So, you know, it depending on how you perceive that 1,000, the original intent of 1,000 concrete, technologically based energy retrofits, clearly the target has not been met. The sort of change over time that the program has metamorphosized into, you know, you're starting to see that that kind of level of outreach of energy savings and energy efficiency, the message is reaching the sort of levels of people that were originally anticipated. So it's definitely not quite what was originally envisaged, but certainly there has been a relatively significant impact in terms of communicating with the population at large. As of this April, and people may have seen the publicity around this, there's now a limited number of grants that are also available for solar hot water through the Solar Colwood program, but available regional-wide in the CRD. So this kind of marks a sort of shift very much in scale in terms of where this program is reaching, and a recognition that there probably just isn't the demand for solar hot water within the community of Colwood on its own to make use of all that grant money that exists. So we'll just take you through a little bit now of the data we collected and some of the kind of conclusions and insights we've drawn from that information. So solar hot water has not really widely been adopted, and the evidence that we have is that it's possibly the wrong technology for the community for a variety of different reasons, and we'll look into some of those later. However, Colwood has benefited quite significantly in terms of the profile and the brand of the city in a national and international way. There's been quite a large number of partnership and outreach opportunities that have resulted as a result of the program, and leverage for other investments, particularly very directly connected with the program investments in the Ductless Split Heat Pump with their partnership with BC Hydro, and also in terms of that energy electric vehicle infrastructure that's going in, which will obviously have long-term benefits. The community has been very resistant to the program in a number of ways. They're not engaged. There's a level of distrust of the city. You know, it could be the best program in the world. There's a significant group of people within the city of Colwood that are just not going to engage with it because they just of the perception they have of the city itself. And we also question the value of short-term incentive programs in general for stimulating the business and the uptake of these type of technologies in general. You know, we had quite a lot of feedback from the focus groups and interviews we had relating to the value of these kind of Live Smart BC grant type approaches to trying to stimulate energy efficiency uptake. To address the is this the wrong technology, we had one of the student projects we had looked at the life cycle analysis of solar hot water. Really what they found, they looked at two questions. One is there a cost saving for the householders which take on board the technology, and the other is does it actually save any greenhouse gas emissions, carbon emissions? And frankly, they found that the CO2 saved was pretty trivial, really. Now, in terms of the BC average, which is taking on sort of average figures for household and energy use, water use, how people heat their water and all that kind of stuff. The amount saved over the standard lifetime of a typical heating unit is 1,810 kilograms over 30 years, which is nothing. Obviously, the savings are a little bit more significant if the person uses natural gas to heat their water, which is a significant percentage of people in this part of the world, but it's not the majority. It's still not an enormous amount. So if your aim is to save carbon emissions, there are better ways of doing it. We also looked at the cost aspects of the technology, and I'm not going to go into this, but we used a number of, the students used a bunch of assumptions based on sort of standard scenarios that are put forward out by by BC Hydro and the BC government. And they got quotes of hot water systems from some of the contractors and installers that are involved in the program. Did we miss out a slide there? Okay. So using these assumptions, we found that given a grant from through Solar Colwood, so this obviously doesn't apply for people who don't have access to those grants. The life saving, if you have the economic saving, if you have electric water heating, was about $1,780 over the 30-year assumed lifespan of the equipment. Rather less if you have gas heating, which is cheaper, $560. So there is a saving, but over 30 years, that's not much. The average occupancy of people in their homes tends to be rather less than that. So, you know, the majority of those savings you're kind of passing on to the next resident of the home rather than gleaning them yourself. Now there are ways you can defer that, or you know, there's ways you can sort of do clever things with financing that you might be able to get a bit more of a benefit up front, but it's fairly marginal, even with the taking into account the grants. So that sort of really gives a summary of, so well, you know, maybe solar hot water isn't really a great thing to be starting with in terms of opening up that conversation about energy efficiency. So where do we start at in terms of the beginning of the program? What was the attitude within the community of Colwood? So we sent out a survey, which was just a little bit after the launch of the program in 2011. So it was just a few more than 1,000 homes were surveyed. We got 209 responses, and here's the data. So there's a modest level of interest in energy efficiency. 40% of people are concerned with their energy bills, but few people have taken much action. So 83% have not had an energy audit, which is the thing you need to do in order to know what's good for your home in terms of retrofitting energy efficiency, and is the only way you can access any of the grants that happen to exist at that time, including the Solar Colwood grants. We had a response where it was roughly the same. A third were unlikely, a third were likely to install energy efficient solutions. Very low awareness of solar hot water technology, very low awareness of Solar Colwood as a program. Bearing in mind at this time that was just after the launch. There had been a reasonable amount of press coverage and such like. 44% were not likely to apply for a grant, whereas 14% were very likely. So you can see even at this initial stage, you have to wonder if the market is there for a level of engagement in the grant program that Colwood was originally hoping to get. We followed that up 2 years later, after the program had been running a while, with another survey asking many similar questions. Again, about the same number of homes surveyed, similar number of responses, and kind of the headline of this survey was that the program hadn't really gained much traction in the community, but what it had done was reach the receptive. So it was essentially they were being relatively successful in preaching to the choir, but weren't really sort of breaking out of the people who were already interested in energy efficiency anyway. So similar level, 47%, slightly more concerned with their energy bills. However, what was definitely of interest and sort of certainly indicated that the program was having an effect is that the number of people who had an energy audit in the last 10 years had gone up quite significantly. So here it was 17% of had an energy audit. Now we've got 29, of which a third were as a result of the Solar Colwood program. So that's quite a substantial number of people who are then directly engaging in discussions around their own energy use and their own home energy efficiency as a result of the opportunity presented by Solar Colwood. Still about the same, a third likely or unlikely to install energy efficiency solutions. But what is perhaps slightly concerning, I think, for Solar Colwood is 50% are still not aware of the program. And this is where, going back to my comment that it seems to be just reaching the converted still, is reaching those people that were likely to make these kind of decisions and these kind of actions anyway. But the actual likelihood of anybody applying for a grant through the Solar Colwood program has actually plummeted. So after 2 years of the program, we've gone from 14% to 4% very likely to apply for a grant. We'll look at, we've got a sort of bit more sort of message stuff around why we think that might be, but it links back to this: is it the right technology, more or less? We also, just as a reference, we carried out a survey in a neighborhood, similar kind of neighborhood in Saanich, just to see, whether whether Colwood is weird, or whether, oh, hang on, we got some of the data's got a bit mangled there. I think there might have been a cut and paste error, actually. Obviously, we didn't ask questions about Solar Colwood for the Saanich neighborhood. Sorry about that, but what we did find is that, broadly speaking, the Colwood population was relatively similar. The one difference that we found was really along the lines of the motivations for why you might carry out energy efficiency. Saanich people seem to be far more motivated by cost savings and just energy reduction in general. The Colwood respondents seem to be more motivated by, quote unquote, doing the right thing or wanting to reduce specifically greenhouse gas emissions. So that may be, and this survey, that's compared to the survey that went out after 2 years of the program. So maybe there is a sort of message that's seeping in there about how engaged people are in the whole wider questions of climate change and trying to take personal responsibility for that. But we don't have the data to really kind of dig into that analysis at all. Oh yeah, here we go. This is what I was talking about. Sorry, I thought that was on the previous slide. So yeah, and Colwood, top 2 reasons for action: energy independence, reducing greenhouse gas emissions; Saanich, saving money, reducing energy unit usage. So there is a difference there. Why that is, we don't have the ability to say. So we think that the city is struggling to reach the average community member, but does have substantial engagement in related issues from some people, but solar hot water is just not a popular technology. So then we did Ingrid's going to take over now and talk about a number of focus groups we did to try and sort of explore with different groups of people exactly what solar hot water has for people and
Great, thank you, Chris. So we did the surveys and then we moved into doing quite a bit of qualitative research, so a number of focus groups. And so I'm going to go through some of the findings that we gathered from that. So sort of early on, before the Solar Colwood program started, we did some focus group with the people that had adopted the technology, but sort of pre-Solar Colwood. And so it's interesting, this group of people here are sort of the regional early adopters. And what we found there is not sort of a huge surprise. It's quite sort of similar to what we know about early adopters, generally speaking. Often very motivated by sort of doing the right thing. They're often also quite sort of self-reliant. They're sort of doing it on their own. They're not dependent on a program or incentives necessarily as such. They are, like in this case, we also found that while they might have had technical difficulties or sort of challenges along the way, they're sort of resolving them themselves, right? So they're sort of handy enough to be able to work out the problems. And again, this is sort of quite a typical profile for somebody who's in a kind of an early adopter, right? They have that confidence and the interest in doing so. We also sort of, they observed some energy and cost savings, but what they also found was that maybe month by month they were seeing, yes, it's working, I'm saving a bit of money, hooray, isn't this nice? But they hadn't maybe necessarily sort of looked into, okay, how much have I spent overall on all the sort of hardware and the installment and all those things, and they hadn't sort of looked at necessarily the break even. So again, sort of, another thing that came out, and this is, you're going to see this as a sort of a red thread, I think, through the data that we're going to talk about now, the sort of contractor inexperience. So the people that are involved in the process, it wasn't sort of necessarily as so smooth, and there was problems in terms of maybe not everybody being on the same level in terms of knowledge and experience, right? So that was sort of some of the things for these early adopters. And then we did a few focus groups for the early adopters in Solar Colwood. And so this was really quite interesting and a unique opportunity for us as researchers to have access to this. And so what we found here was more this notion of it being a risk and taking a leap. So risk in terms of the financial risk. So there was sort of still perceived as it's not like this is something that's cheap that you can just sort of squeeze into your monthly budget. You have some money left over after you've done your food shopping. It's not quite that scale, right? So it's more complex. It involves more money. So risk in terms of finances and taking a leap in terms of the technology, right? So Chris was talking about the sort of nature of solar technology. So there were really this sense of taking a leap and trusting that this might be the right thing to do. We also found a lot of conversation about the information stage would take, there was so much information to digest, and a lot of the times it wasn't something that you could just sort of put together in a nice little package and you'd go home and read it and make a decision. No, you'd go home and read it, and then you go on Google, you go and start searching and looking for different discussions on the topic, looking for additional sources. And as researchers, it doesn't often happen in a focus group, but there was moments where we would sit back and the participants would freely have a conversation and debate. Oh, where did you find that piece of information? Oh, is that where you looked? And we almost sort of remember, we sort of stepped back, and it was quite interesting to see how they were very well versed in the information, but it was quite clear it hadn't been that easy to start with, right? And this is interesting too, sort of no immediate financial rewards. And often when we talk about social change and people moving from sort of undesirable behavior to a better behavior, is that as we're moving from A to B, we want to see some rewards, right? To make sure that we're making the right decision. So it wasn't always sort of this seeing that, hey, I'm in financially, which was a risk, right? That you're seeing these savings. They weren't seeing the savings straight away, right? And so we had these sort of keywords here: patience, have to wait, not sure what's going to happen, but still there was an inherent trust in that they made the right decision and this was the right technology for them. Also, hidden unexpected costs. There were some great stories about the installers coming to their homes and starting to put this technology up, and they're having to drill a hole here, and then you have to move this over here, and suddenly a little small project ended up being moving your whole top of your house around, kind of thing. So again, these sort of hidden costs that sort of were surfacing. So it's quite interesting, really. Then we had, but again, as Chris was mentioning, we saw this in the service too, that there was an increased awareness about solar and the technology, and also other energy saving measures. And again, here, sort of just a quote to illustrate that. I know the system is working. It's opened my eyes to solar, and also opened people's eyes to other things that you can be doing. I mean, again, in the focus groups, they were already talking about, although they hadn't seen the benefits yet, they were already talking about what are we going to do next. So, okay, I'm going to try and get this into my house, and so we're sort of seeing this sort of people being quite enthusiastic about energy savings, right? Which is pretty cool. Of course, this positive role of the early program champion, and we'll come back to this a little bit later on in terms of what we know from social marketing. But we're also seeing in these accounts of the early adopters that there was sort of positive stories about Solar Colwood. And Solar Colwood did have a few sort of quite outspoken and prominent champions related to the council, right? They were also adopting some of these behaviors, and they were sort of seeing them doing it, and there was really, personal conversations with the councillor that she's also doing it. So let's try this out. So we were sort of seeing some evidence of that as well. Now the non-adopters. So this is interesting, right? The people that choose not to go ahead and install solar. So there's I think a lot of us can potentially identify with this too. There is this notion of there's a new technology, but is it the right one, like Chris was saying? So there was a lot of confusion amongst this group of people related to the energy audits, related to the technology, and also the role of the city within this regard. They were getting, and we'll talk more about this too, but they were getting sort of mixed messages from the different stakeholders involved. They would get, yes, this is a great idea, but they would also get, this is not such a good idea. And there was a lot of opinions floating around, which we also saw being manifested in the press as well and in the media, right? They wanted to do the right thing, but then of course here we get the more sort of skeptical person. And this quote illustrates this quite well. We say, we'll wait and see what happens down the tube, right? If something else changes, or if they come up with something better, something that's clearer, something that's easier, sort of holding off, waiting to see, how is this going to work out, right? There was also this perception that there was lack of data to make an informed choice. And what kind of data is this particular group looking for? They want data that tells them they're going to make an energy saving, going to result in some financial benefit. So give me the numbers, give me the facts, so I can make an informed decision. So there's sort of an ultimatum there. Unless you give this to me, I will not make an informed decision. But of course, ironically, it also meant even if you were given this by the city, you were still not trusting the information necessarily, right? So there's sort of, are you actually going to be able to move forward because you created this condition for yourself? So there was still discussion that they're still likely to act on energy efficiency, but probably not again that solar hot water, right? So coming back to what Chris talked about before. And this is interesting. We had this quite a bit too, this distrust in the city. And we often see this in the sort of social marketing or behavioral change programs, that there can often be a distrust in the sort of government and municipality. What is the intention? And we sort of see this here too. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's this whole quote is packed of distrust, right? You get, I definitely saw competing interests. Why is City of Colwood doing this? Is somebody else behind them pushing the green interest, right? So a lot of distrust. And you also see this distrust, not just in the city, but it's sort of spreading to the other stakeholders that are part of this. And this has to do with the auditors and the installers. People selling the product, they're just selling it, they're putting money in their own pocket. So again, this sort of hidden agenda underneath here. So you can see how even if the information is provided, I'm not going to trust it because I don't have faith in the people that are providing it. And I'll pass over to Chris to talk a little bit about the interviews.
This is just going to be a quick one. We carried out a number of interviews with some of the commercial people who are involved in this, so the people who are installing the equipment in homes, and also the auditors who are carrying out the energy audits. And what we were really looking for here is on one hand was a reflection on the project as a process, and by and large everybody was very happy with that. They said they thought Colwood had designed a pretty good program. There were little bits and pieces that maybe weren't working quite as well, but overall it was a fairly easy process for them, just part of the sort of wider bureaucracy that they were used to dealing with around grants and whatnot. But what we were also interested in is how programs like this were affecting their business. And all of the people we spoke to was really the uptake was too slow for it to have any significant impact on their business. Colwood was just another place that they worked, and yes, there was something interesting happening there, but it wasn't on a high enough volume for them to really take a huge deal of note. And they were very, very critical across the board of the whole process of incentives that we kind of have got used to, to support things like installing energy efficiency upgrades in our homes. Because they said there's no stability there. They come and they go. So, it encourages a complete sort of boom and bust cycle. In that people sort of hear that a sort of grant stream is going to stop suddenly, and sometimes there isn't much notice. So these auditors and the installers, they suddenly get deluged with loads and loads of customers that they don't have the capacity to serve properly. But then the grants go away and they get no business. So they don't want to invest too much in those boom stages, because then they're just going to have to lay folks off at the end because they don't have any business anymore, because everyone's then waiting because they assume these grants are suddenly going to pop back again, which historically they kind of have done. So everyone we spoke to in these interviews just had a high level of frustration over the lack of sort of stability, and a very commonly held view was, these incentives just don't help us. We'd rather, if they were going to come and just stay there, fine, but the way we are now with them coming and going is worse than with no incentives at all, and then people can just make up their own minds. But we can sort of invest in ourselves because we know this is the state of play that we're in and this is what we have to deal with, and we make our business like that. But the constant changing environment was a problem. However, interestingly, and possibly as a result of the Solar Colwood program, is that there's been quite a stimulation of innovation in solar hot water at Kajzer College. One of the contractors that's very engaged in installations is also an instructor at Kajzer. He's actually been putting in quite a lot of work in innovating to bring down the cost of the units, and so that's perhaps. I mean, it's hard to say exactly whether it's a direct result from the Solar Colwood program or whether it's just because he's a guy that's interested in this sort of stuff. But it is perhaps a sign that under the surface, programs such as this are stimulating a certain amount of development. Another issue that came up and partly explains the confusion we think in the population is that auditors are not recommending the solar hot water. Mainly, and there's two reasons for that. One is it's not necessarily the best technology for energy reduction. You're going to get a lot more bang for your buck with insulation, with all the unglamorous kind of bits and pieces that take place in your basement, in your attic, and whatnot. But also, and this was very sort of interesting one to us, is that their software is actually not structured to really deal with solar hot water as a technology. Most energy efficiency products work best, are sort of somewhat independent of the household and are dependent on the structure of the house. So how leaky is it? How much energy, what energy do you use to heat it, and that kind of thing. Whereas solar hot water is much more dependent on the household composition, so how many people are living in the house. You have more people, they use more hot water, you're going to get more energy savings if you have solar hot water if you've got a big house. And that's just not part of the standard software that the auditors use. And so if an auditor was in a very, very busy and was in a rush and they were just going to basically read off the results of their modeling, they're not going to be recommending solar hot water, even if it's an appropriate recommendation. So it very much is dependent on the quality and the degree to which, and the quality of the auditor and the degree to which the auditor is prepared to really look at your household as well as just the structure of the house. So it led on because all those people that are getting home energy audits as part of the program, so many of them are not getting recommended solar hot water, even if perhaps whether or not it's a good decision for them or not, it's not part of the conversation too often. And that's leading to confusion, that's leading to other things being taken on instead. So I'm going to hand back to Ingrid, who's going to sort of do a bit of analysis on the social marketing side of this.
And we've sort of said as well that please, our colleagues can jump in and add to it as we go through. But I mean, it's Solar Colwood and the program is really interesting, of course, from a sort of social marketing perspective, and it potentially also helps to explain some of the challenges that the program has been facing. So this is some work by Mackenzie Moore, and what we know in terms of what are some of the factors that is going to facilitate sort of this idea of social diffusion or sort of sustainable behavior diffusion in a community or in a population. And we know that if these sort of factors are in place and we're working with them, then the more likely we are, the higher the probability that a behavior is going to take off, basically. And of course, if we look at, thinking of what Chris just said and our knowledge of solar, we can quickly see that Solar Colwood and the city of Colwood did not have an easy task ahead of them, right? Because if we look at here, so some of the things that are important for something for behavior to take off and to spread in a community, this notion of relative advantage. So is the behavior perceived to be sort of superior to the behavior that we're leaving behind, right? Is the perceived risk, will adopting the behavior increase the the probability of financial loss or social disapproval, for example. Complexity, is the new behavior challenging? Compatibility, is it compatible with the target audience? Was it compatible with the community, right? And the values that are manifested in the community. Trialability, can the behavior be tried before making a long-term commitment? And then we have observability and commitment at the end. So is the behavior visible to others? So we know from experience that if something is visible, we can see it, that it's more tangible, then we're more likely to adopt it, right? Commitment, key as well. Do we have commitment from the early adopters? And that's a really big one as well when we're talking about something spreading in a community. So if we look at this and sort of look at Solar Colwood and the program itself, so in terms of relative advantage, yes, you could debate, and I'm sure we could find numbers to support the potentially there could be a relative advantage, although there's that possibility that, as we say, is it really the best technology? But possibly yes. But again, there was sort of this perception that it's not perceived as a superior technology. It may not provide us with the benefits that we want. So again, it's sort of casting some doubt in this particular. And we really want to be confident that what you're moving towards is better than what you're leaving behind. And so we don't have that confidence here. And just as Chris said, there was again mixed messages in terms of these benefits, right? So this area was a difficult one. Perceived risk as well. So again, we've talked about this, but definitely a risk in terms of the technology and attaching yourself to a technology that may change and something better is going to come along. And again, the financial risk and hidden costs. And I guess this little quote sort of again highlights that. I was happy to have it done, but it wasn't the credit card, right? And again, that's not a good position to be. So again, that risk, the perceived risk, is high. Complexity, it's not something that again is done easily, right? It's you spend a lot of time in those early stages of your sort of consumer decision making, looking for information, weighing the different alternatives, and that's creating complexity. And compatibility is sort of mixed, and that some of our survey material also showing that was sort of the awareness and the values within the community. Wasn't as straightforward that this was sort of a sort of green city to start with. This is where the city is moving towards, but it's not necessarily their starting point. People haven't historically moved to Colwood because it's a sustainable and green city. So there's sort of pockets of people that are interested and big pockets of people that are not that interested. So again, there's that disconnect. So it's a huge education component piece that takes more than 2 or 3 years, right? Like we're talking a much longer time span. And then trialability and observability, we know as well that these are really important things when we talk about change in our behaviors. And we know that ourselves, not from solar, but even in terms of our own lives and things that we've tried to change. From healthy living to stop smoking to whatever it may be, right? This is the same idea. So can the behavior be tried? And with solar, it's not something that you just can buy and take home and try. If I don't like it, can I give it back, right? You can't do that. While it's something that we can, it's potentially more tangible than other things in the sense that we can put it in our houses, we can see it, like we can see some from our window here on our buildings, right? It's tangible in that sense. So we can observe it, and we've seen with Solar Colwood that they've tried to look at ways of how they can capitalize this. The sort of new behavior is you can actually observe it. You can see that some people have started to put solar on their houses, right? But the trialability has been difficult. And they did, Solar Colwood did, put some strategies in place to address this in terms of early on this kind of Solar Colwood open house. You could come, you can get information about it. But again, there was sort of limited to start with, and then it's accelerated sort of more the halfway of the program. We're seeing more of these kind of notions of open houses. People can come and experience the product before they decide themselves. And what else was I going to say here? Another thing was these notions of champions. And so you see some of these pictures here to the right of a couple here and their dogs, and they sort of halfway through the program there was a shift where they started to much more capitalize on these stories that were created by the early champions. They weren't doing that in the beginning. It was sort of being quite over-reliant on a few individuals that were doing a lot and out in the community. And that worked to a point. People thought, great, so-and-so is doing it. But there wasn't enough, they needed more champions to be out there, because it sort of backfired in the sense that then it was like, oh, so-and-so is still doing it. Nobody else is doing it. Why is nobody else doing it? Why is that person being so persistent? You know, so it's sort of, from being a positive thing, it sort of shifted to being, hang on a minute. And so they needed, in some sense, that some of those early adopters needed to be on board much earlier. And we've seen that, so it's a shift that's happened. We've seen these stories. You can go on their website, you can see really rich and sort of inspirational stories that people are going to go and think, oh, I can possibly do that too. You know, I'm a family with 4 children. Oh, and so are they, right? And they were seeing those kind of conversations taking place, because we know as well from social marketing, when those conversations between people are taking place, that's when you're more likely to adopt it. Is there anything else you want to add to that? Sounds good. Move on, Charles says. Yeah, and then I think that's...
Well, we already spoke about, I think, some of the incentive and grants projects. Now, we've been kind of pessimistic on the program and some of the outcomes of the program, but definitely for the city of Colwood in particular, and for awareness of energy efficiency in the community, it's been very positive. City of Colwood has won recognition from various different people. They were recognized by the BC municipalities. They have been recognized at national levels. I was just hearing a story that they're getting contacted internationally of people that are quite interested in the program and how the program ran. So it's definitely sort of raised the profile of Colwood and the project, and people are interested, and you see this expansion to the CRD as perhaps being the sort of modeling of Colwood going out into the community. In terms of tangible benefits directly from the program, there definitely has been this uptake of people doing audits, and seeing a lot more people doing audits than they had before. A lot of you all coming to Royal Roads, you might have seen the road sign. That was one of the key ways that people found out about the program, that let people know about the program, and then people would contact or go on the website and look and get information. They had a lot of uptake, a relatively lot of uptake of this Ductless Split Heat Pump, which is a technology. I will say I was influenced by the Solar Colwood program. I hadn't heard about it. I have baseboard heaters. I learned about the technology and I installed it myself. And from talking to the installers and people, there's lots of people installing this technology themselves, whether there are grants or not. And it's really spread, and they had quite good uptake through the program, but it's a technology that is getting out there. And now this program is rolling out to the CRD. So any of you all who live anywhere in the CRD, including myself, I have tracking number 49 apparently, to install a system at my house now, which is a complex system to actually get something installed, but anyone living in the CRD can now go get a grant through the Solar Colwood program in order to install a system at their house. And these grants are up to $3,000 on a system, and there is this system now called the Sun system that they're saying they can deliver for, I think it will cost me $3,000 or something out of pocket to get the system. So it will be interesting. That's what I'm in conversation now about putting it there. As part of the program, Colwood gained, and all of these partners gained, a lot of interactions. We've had a lot of interactions, gotten to know the people at the city, had a lot of interactions, and talked about a lot of other topics as well, and finding ways to work together. BC Hydro tried out several things. They tried out a program where you could get low interest loans through BC Hydro. They tried this Ductless Split program and other things. So several partners. There's been a project around smart homes and having the boards. So there's been a lot of different things that have come out of it, the cars, the electric car outreach and things. And then the piece that we've been quite involved with was this education outreach piece. So in the project, one thing that, and I didn't get mentioned before, but we were observing in the focus groups and when we were understanding who had installed the technology. So who are these 31 homes? We found that they were, for the most part, typically an older demographic, often 2 people, a bit of extra income. The initial price was not their big concern. They wanted to do something. They wanted to set an example. And we had a couple of families through the program, but we were saying, well, who really would benefit from this? The people with young kids, bigger families, those would be people that would really benefit from it. So we started brainstorming about, well, is there a way we could do an outreach piece of the program that would be an education component? So we had some money through the PICS program, the grant that we had received, and we designed a program that then was delivered by Susan Kerr and one of our BSc major project teams, where they went to Dunsmuir Middle School here in Colwood and delivered a series of educational pieces to the 7th grade students in the school. And they did it through a particular class in that school, which was around sort of sustainability and community. And so they delivered 3 lessons. In the first lesson, the students went to Judith Cullington's house, where she has an electric car, she has a solar hot water system, and she has smart home technology, and they brought in some cool technology where they were doing thermal imaging. One of the challenges of solar hot water, I was noting from reading the notes about these home visits, is so they divided the students and they went to different stations and learned about these different technologies. People loved the electric car. They thought it was so cool. They wanted to learn about electric cars. They wanted to really engage in that technology. They loved the camera, the solar imaging camera. They liked the little technology where on a tablet you could watch when you turn on a light or turn on the dryer, how much energy all these different things were using. And then they would get to the solar hot water and say, well, there's the panel, so it heats your water. What's the big deal? This isn't a technology that's really sexy and exciting and something that people are really get excited about. And when you talk to people, so Steve Grundy, for example, here on campus has a solar hot water system. You say, well, what do you think of your system, Steve? He says, I don't know, I guess it works. I get hot water. I don't even think about it, right? So it's a system that's sort of working in the background and you don't think about it. It's not something that is ever present. And that's part of, in a way, what makes it hard to sell, because people think, well, I have hot water right now. Why do I need to change? What difference do I need to make? So those are some of the things. So part of what we were trying to do and what the project was trying to do here was to see if we could foster what we would say intergenerational learning. Because, of course, these kids are not going to be buying solar hot water systems. Their parents will. And so part of educating kids about the importance of energy and energy efficiency and different technologies was then to start a conversation with their parents. And that was something that we found was somewhat difficult in the program, in part because you're dealing with 7th graders and trying to think about and interact, get 7th graders to interact with their parents in the first place. So they had a challenge in trying to send home permission forms and surveys to get the parents to fill out information forms. They had a very low return rate on those. So it was difficult to even get firm data about what types of conversations or what impacts may be there. And then, it's very hard to show the outcomes, and we're glad Brian is going to teach us all how to design and understand outcomes of these programs, how much conversations went on, what were the impacts of those conversations. Will the impacts mainly be perhaps on the students who later know something about this technology, or will it be these conversations that may get started and they say, hey, Dad, why don't we have a hot water system like this in our homes? We don't know what the outcomes in a way in the longer term will be. We do know that there's interest among young people in these technologies. They want to do things. My kids come home from school every day and often talk about, wow, we learned about how important it is to change our behavior, how important these messages are sort of getting out there, and finding ways to engage kids in that process and get them to engage in actually influencing choices that families make, I think will be important. The final, we put together just some discussion questions in terms of the lessons learned. One, and we have Michael Baxter, at least one of our representatives from the city of Colwood, who could talk a little bit perhaps about the benefits to the city of Colwood as they perceive them. But, you know, this was a program that most of the money was directed to these incentive grants. The grants were not used. I assume the money was not ever received or would be given back in a way. You know, what was the benefit? How can we capture and understand what the benefits of the program overall were? Now, in hindsight, would the program have been designed differently? What would be the changes in the program and how it would be designed? Clearly, there are many challenges in solar hot water. So, you know, how would you design an optimal program that you might take to NRCan or another funder? And then the challenge is the city. So the city of Colwood being just one municipality within a broader swath of municipalities, hard to manage or run perhaps. I mean, there are some advantages to having a smaller group, but then also disadvantages. Should this have been or would have been more successful as a CRD-wide or a broader project from the beginning? So those are just some of the questions or ideas that we had at the end. Thank you. So we're happy to take your questions, and Michael's here, and if you have some questions for the city. Does anybody have a solar hot water system?
I don't, but I've got a question. This pushback you have from people, it sounds like there's a lot of distrust about people's motives for trying to push this. What's the basis of this? Is this just paranoia, or is there a history in Colwood of trying to force technologies on people?
Well, it became a divisive issue within the elections that were held. So just not long after the program was launched, the elections were held, and the Solar Colwood program was held up as an issue. Essentially, the argument was that it was costing the city money, it was costing the city time and effort, and what were we getting out of it? We weren't getting anything really back out of it. And so I think there was a feeling among a certain group in the city that would support low taxes, low city involvement, and a lot of different things, that this was just a big boondoggle, waste of time and money program, and therefore, whatever you're going to tell me about it, I'm not going to listen.
But even prior to that, there was a certain distrust arranged around projects that have happened in the past that haven't been perhaps successful. I believe it was a particular one was a stormwater, is that right? Sewer project that had kind of not been very successful in the past, and you know, regardless of the the logic behind using past performance to predict future performance, I think there's just an undercurrent of not really trusting the city to do the right thing with money that they had.
And I think it's sort of, yes, specific to Colwood too, but we're seeing that kind of this sort of similar pattern happening across other sort of, again, the social change initiatives. You know, if it's coming from a government, a municipality, a police, right? And then, you know, how is it, you always have to sort of look at how is it going to be perceived by the sort of the target user or whoever it is we're looking at. And so we often see partnering with other organizations that will have a different, you know, the user will have a different perception of. And I think we've sort of seen that potentially now with the City Green, that there was sort of also been a little bit of shift in terms of the partnerships there as well.
And Michael, did you have
I just wanted to say that the people who distrusted the city because of the past errors with the sewer were quite justified in doing so. The errors were I've never seen anything like that. And the fact that the people they're now talking to are the people who actually cleaned up the mess, obviously, you know, I mean, they don't necessarily know that. But we did run into a few people, and some of them ran for election, who just absolutely 100% buy into the idea that climate change is something being foisted on the public so that people, mostly university researchers, can make a lot of money. Because I've seen it with BMWs in the parking lot, they chose to make it way too much money. But they just completely buy into that.
Those cars belong to students.
I was going to actually ask how much of a barrier the actual upfront cost must be, and if that was surmountable, do you think that it would have run differently?
Right, so this is a technology, so as we said, it's not a technology you can trial or that you can step into. It's a technology that you have to put all the money up front, and then you receive these benefits over a long period of time. So that's a challenge. Now, they tried to overcome that in part, and many instances around different places have tried to do this where, well, if we'll give you a low interest loan, you don't actually have to we'll put the money up front and then you pay us back essentially from your returns over time, then you'll pay that money back. And BC Hydro tried to bring forward that loan idea. There was very limited uptake. There was a similar program in Vancouver which also experienced very limited uptake from that.
I think people can borrow. The people who feel they've got enough money to do it can borrow money at less than the hydro rate. So they don't see the point.
The financing constraints, to me, I don't think there's been a lot of evidence that so the sticker price has an impact. There were a lot of people that will just say, I can't afford it. And so they won't even look at it. But in terms of those people who are interested, financial decisions are not the main driver. Those people who are interested would be able to finance it. As you get into questions of, so part of it is this the right technology? If I'm really so I have my home energy audit and they're telling me, well, you should be putting in a new heat pump in your house and you should be putting in insulation and doing all these new windows, perhaps, these other things, and this gets put way down the list. So by the time I spend $12,000 doing everything else, do I really want to add this on another $8,000? And I'm not sure about the benefits, and that's a rational, I think, approach to how you would consider it.
And even the best, I mean, the data is a bit fuzzy, but most of the data suggests that you will get a payback, but it's over a very long period of time. And I think people in general were uncomfortable with the length of time. If the whole kind of question of how much it's going to cost was their main kind of decision-making point, that the payback period is just too long for those people. Now it's coming down. I mean, the figures the students used, they did factor in a sort of fair degree of inflation in energy costs, but the fact is energy costs are going up and the costs of the systems are coming down. So maybe it was just too soon. Maybe if the program had started now, there'd be a different. But then maybe the innovation for the conversion unit wouldn't have happened. I mean, there's so many kind of questions that you can't really answer.
I mean, so before this, there was a program province-wide where they tried to get people to adopt. I mean, this is just not this is not a new technology, but it's not a common technology here. But you certainly go to other countries and lots of people have these systems and they're very common, and it's just a normal thing to put one in.
Because energy costs are way higher in other countries, and also the electricity we have here comes largely from clean sources. So even for a lot of people, the carbon question isn't really a big deal either, because it's all coming from hydropower. So
I was just going to pick up on that one, Chris. Did I understand you correctly then, the slide that you showed, that the net impact on greenhouse gas emission, the carbon footprint, that it was not huge? It wasn't a huge this particular technology.
For an average BC home, it's almost negligible.
But the ductless split heat pump technology, did it have a much more significant?
It has a much more significant energy efficiency saving. So if you're already on electric, often it's someone that's already on electric, like electric baseboards. So I can say, I put one in, I would say your costs go down by about a third. And heating is a much greater portion of your electric bill. So say 70% of your electric bill is for heating in your house, whereas hot water maybe 20%. So you're just going to have a much greater impact on your bill, and you're going to get a greater return. And so
the other advantage is it's not. I mean, it still doesn't make a vast difference for greenhouse gases because of the nature of our electricity. But what it does do is it helps. A heating system helps much more BC Hydro manage load levels, whereas hot water doesn't help them very much. So, and that sort of, if you're interested, for example, in Site C or something like that, you're you're going to be more inclined to go for something which stops you from heating too much, or energy efficient light bulbs or something like that, rather than hot water.
So just, you may have addressed this, and I apologize, I came in a bit late. So why was the solar hot water chosen as the sort of leader of this? Did you? Oh, sorry.
I can tell you that's because the grant program was targeted at solar hot water. And we actually had to work on NRCan, persuade them to allow us to fund other things.
Other things.
And the one thing they consistently would not allow us to fund, except under one exception, which I'll mention, they wouldn't allow us to fund PV, so photovoltaic.
Oh.
Yeah, and the only way they would allow us to fund that is if you own an electric car. So if you're buying the PV to provide fuel for your electric car, then it's a huge GHG.
So you see the bakery up here.
The row.
Yeah, so they have PV panels there, the photovoltaic to produce electricity, which theoretically can be used because they have a charging station for an electric car there.
Oh.
Now it's just
It's NRCan's fault, really, that it's focused on solar.
I mean, I think they wanted to see
Yeah.
they
Interesting, though.
they wanted to see an application of the technology. Part of what they were trying to do is a concentrated application. So because you had this problem where you don't have installers, no systems are going to get sold and installed. So if you can get a concentrated group area where lots of systems are getting installed, then you can get the necessary infrastructure to install those systems. As we saw, there wasn't, in a way, enough uptake to have all that infrastructure. I mean, there's a couple of installers that have done most of the installs. There's several other companies that are qualified. But even those people, talking with them about the systems, they say, oh, it's a small piece of our business overall.
But I think one of the problems is that plumbers are lousy salesmen. Over and over again, we've seen people go into homes and not try and upsell. The one contractor does most of the install. He's actually a good salesman, and he only does solar hot water. Well, mostly. He had to take a break because there was a little bit of lull in the number of people coming forward. But he is trying to sell you a system for $3,000. Almost all of his installs are over $8,000 because he upsells. He'll try and sell you a better hot water tank.
Oh.
Thanks for the tip.
It really is a good.
We haven't signed the contract yet.
But no other plumber that we've come across tries to sell these great
Honestly,
hot water tanks.
And where these systems make the most sense is to have them built in from the very beginning, right? If everything's built in from the beginning, because they're complex to plumb, they have to actually have piping from your rooftop collector all the way down to your hot water tank. There's often two hot water tanks. You have a preheat tank and a main tank. So they're complicated systems to retrofit, but they would be fairly easy systems to install from the beginning, but no one will pay for them. So this is what all the builders say. So we had some BSc projects looking at will home energy efficiency. So if I install a system, does it raise the value of my house? And in general, the answer is no. It's not something that real estate agents ever talk about. They don't talk about energy efficiency and all these different things. And there's not a lot of evidence that it would raise. In some cases, it might lower because people say, what if this thing breaks? What am I going to do? So in that sense, if they were, I don't know if they were mandated, if there was a way that you could get them into, so new houses have to be solar ready, but you're not seeing these new houses coming with these systems, but they could build them in much cheaper, and then they would be there for the whole life of the house, and they would pay back whoever owned the house. Society would receive those benefits, but that piece hasn't been worked out. Thank you.
No, I see it's 1 o'clock. Thanks, Charles, Ingrid, and Chris. That was really interesting to hear more about that project. Would it be okay if I share the slides online in case people want to see them again? Thank you, everyone, for coming today, and for those who joined us online. Cheers.